lost control!
Sonic fans, we've never been more back. After months of painful anticipation, Sonic X Shadow Generations is finally here, and man, it was so worth the wait. I enjoyed every moment of my time playing through this game, and yeah, I do have a few minor bits and pieces of annoyance here and there that I will go over, but I can't stress enough that this is probably one of the best modern Sonic titles you can get your hands on. You get what was already a contender for the best modern Sonic game, but now it comes with a Shadow game that's just slightly shorter, but just as good, if not arguably better. This video is mostly going to be covering the Shadow content, because Sonic Generations is pretty much the same game it's always been. It's just had some alterations here and there that I'll be going over first before we jump into the Shadow section. This video won't be spoiler-free for Sonic Generations, but it will be spoiler-free for Shadow Generations up to a point. Once I get to talking about spoilers, I will clearly declare so and give time for people to click off the video, and then you can come back once you've played the game yourself. So, without further ado, let's just get into the damn review already. Starting with the changes made to base Sonic Generations. So, gameplay-wise, this is pretty much the exact same game you played back in 2011, just with a few extra bits. Now, I didn't necessarily think Generations needed much changing, it was already a really damn solid game, but there are a few things I think they could have done to tune it up. Namely, I would have liked to see the S-ranks be made a bit tighter, because in base gens, S-ranks are handed out like candy on Halloween night. The two main changes to gameplay is, one, both Sonics have been given the drop dash, and to be honest, I didn't get a lot of use out of it for either Sonic, but I assume someone who is a lot better at these games than I am could probably figure out some use for it. The other notable change is that all the levels have been given a small handful of hidden Chao to find, and while functionally it's just another collectible to add to the list, I appreciate that the Chao you find show up on the level in the white space hub, and that they're all different kinds of Chao. Hero, Dark, Neutral, Chaos, you name it, they're all unique. It's a cute little extra thing that they've added, and I'm hoping and praying it's an excuse to model all the Chao types again, so we can implement the Chao Garden into a future game. Please, Sonic Team? In not-so-great news, they have removed the playable Sonic 1 that was unlockable in the original version of Generations. I know, right? Literally 1990. But to be real with you, I'm not exactly mourning its removal personally, but it would be irresponsible of me not to criticize the removal of content, so how dare you. But with all this, as I said earlier, it's still Sonic Generations, and Generations is a damn good video game. It's still all the same stuff. You have the engaging high-speed, high-skill ceiling platforming in both 2D and 3D, you can still unlock tons of collectibles, Planet Wisp can still kiss my planet-sized ass, and overall, this is a good port. It seems they've finally learned their lesson from the whole Sonic Colors Ultimate fiasco. Now, if only they didn't shove Denuvo in this thing. But what's easily the most talked about change with base Sonic Generations is that all the dialogue has been rewritten and re-recorded. Ian Flynn has taken this game's dialogue and given it a bit of a polish up, and as for me personally, it's 50-50. I like some changes, don't like others. I like that Sonic and Tails don't pretend they don't remember Green Hill and Chemical Plant anymore, and I like that modern Sonic now responds to his friends when they thank him for saving them, but some of the new lines of dialogue can come off as feeling a bit unnatural, and in some cases they can be unintentionally hilarious. Like, for instance, when Tails explains to Sonic that they are in fact in a time travel plot, Sonic kinda just stares vacantly for a few seconds before loudly blurting out, "Without the Time Stones!" Now, as a Sonic superfan, I do in fact appreciate that the Time Stones are being acknowledged again after 30 years, but this was a weird time to bring them up. It did feel a little forced. And another funny one is when Knuckles asks Classic Sonic what happened to the rest of Angel Island. And since they didn't bother changing the animation, Classic Sonic just pats his belly, implying that he ate the damn thing. Another big point of contention is the changes they've made to Amy. And to be honest, Amy as a character is one I've wanted to make a video on for ages now, so for now, I'll leave it to this. Amy and Modern Sonic's interaction is proof that they definitely should have changed some of these animations a tiny bit, because Ian Flynn is clearly struggling here to write an interaction between these two that isn't mean-spirited, and that ends with Sonic looking annoyed. And, like, I'm not gonna blame him for that. I'm not a Flynn hater. Dude has a lot of talent and a lot of love for this franchise, and it shows in his work, but he's not infallible. He has had notable issues in his work in the past, and sometimes Sega can just work against him. But you know what? I'd take this over the writing of the 2010s games any day. No disrespect to Pontef and Graf as writers either, it's just that their Sonic stuff isn't their best work. But you know what? Despite all these writing changes, Eggman still gets his teaching degree, so it's all cool with me. One thing that does genuinely baffle me about this remaster is that they didn't address one of the biggest criticisms of the original game, being the Time Eater fight. Now, I understand that this is just a remaster, and asking them to remake the entire fight from scratch would have been a bit much, but for the love of God, did you really have to keep the constant spam of
Charge into the core!
Keep dodging or you'll get crushed! Switch and go after it! Time's going to slow down!
Looks like a homing shot!
Careful, Sonic! Let's be careful, Mr. Sonic!
That's a homing shot! Careful, Sonic! Be careful, Sonic!
It looks like a homing shot!
Careful, Sonic! That's a homing shot!
Be careful, Sonic!
like, surely it wouldn't be that hard to get these lines to be less frequent at absolute least. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about base gens. Oh yeah, also apparently they covered up more of Rouge's back or something. Oh no! Anyway, Sonic Generations is still a fantastic game that I can easily start up and just have some classic high-speed platforming fun with whenever I get the urge to. And admittedly, if it was just this remaster, I think it would be a tiny bit disappointing, if nice to bring Generations to modern platforms, but as we know, that's not the only thing we got. That's right, the big selling point of this remaster would be that it came with an entirely new campaign where you get to play as Shadow the Hedgehog, fit with his own levels, bosses, and a new story. It's genius, quite frankly. Everyone loves Shadow the Hedgehog. He's got one of the coolest stories and character arcs in the series, he's the face of countless internet memes, he was a girl's prom date once! And boy, did Sonic Team put in the work with this one. A solid 6 zones with 2 acts each and 4 bosses with an open zone hub world to connect it all. So, how is it? Well, not to undersell it, but it's peak. It's raw, it's stellar, it's fire, it's goated with the sauce. It is delicious, it's a mastercraft, it's superb, it's sexy, it's the answer to the life and universe and everything, and it's somehow made a Forces level good. So, to talk about the gameplay then. Shadow Generations may look at first like it's just Sonic Generations, but you're playing as the funny Latina-loving guy, but Shadow actually controls notably different to Sonic in a good few ways. The first big obvious change being that there's that big Chaos control prompt on the bottom. Once that gauge is full, you can pull the left trigger, channel your inner Dio Brando, and freeze time for 5 seconds. This freezes everything in the level that you don't use to progress. Things like springs and pulleys will still behave as normal, as well as freezing the actual timer. The level design gives you a lot of ways to use this, such as being able to turn projectiles into platforms, make tricky platform sections a bit easier, and there's even dedicated warp points you can use it to take a massive shortcut. Chaos Control is an interesting multi-purpose tool that already justifies Shadow being a different playable character, but he's got more. Namely, his Chaos Spear, which as well as being used to activate switches from a distance and stun enemies, I've also seen people use the fact that it keeps Shadow airborne for a bit longer when used, to do some crazy speedrun tech. All this alone is pretty cool, but there's one final major addition, and it's the biggest one. The Doom Powers. Yeah, I really wish I'd waited until the Doom Powers trailer came out to make my video talking about the game pre-release, because goddamn, this was a big feature that I just didn't get to talk about that much. The Doom Powers range from upgrading your basic moves to giving you entirely new techniques, and the level design rewards you for using them in clever ways. And the level design has tons of alternate routes that make the levels incredibly replayable, giving you incentive to return to previous levels once you unlock new Doom Powers to see how they can help you cut down your time. I don't think all of them are winners. I think Doom Morph is pretty lame, although that could just be a skill issue on my part because I swear I couldn't figure out how to control it properly. But mostly they just purely enhance the gameplay. Another interesting thing I noticed about Shadow's gameplay is unlike Sonic, who gains boosts from both rings and killing enemies, Shadow only gets it from rings, meaning it's a much more valuable resource in Shadow's gameplay, and you have to use it more wisely and be on point with your ring collecting to get good times in. Hey, it's your boy, Editing Ramen. I just wanted to clarify on something. While you don't get boost gauge for killing enemies, you do get boost gauge for using Chaos Spear on them, so be sure to try and use Chaos Spear as much as possible to keep your boost gauge going. And oh my god, they've remembered how to design levels, finally! I already talked at large about how using your powers often leads to alternate paths, but let me tell you, when I say you have to use them wisely, some of these are in places that are just vague enough to make you feel like a genius for finding them, but they're also naturally signposted enough that you can figure it out on your own. I think Kingdom Valley Act 1 and Sunset Heights Act 1 are the peak of this game's level design personally. These two levels have such a good sense of flow to them and have some really clever hidden paths. And to be honest, the fact that my two favorite levels in this game are the ones from the two games that are considered to be two of Sonic's biggest failures is quite poetic. As for the boss fights, they're pretty solid as well. They're not quite like the Frontiers Titan fights where they have these insane levels of hype to them, but they're still fun encounters that really test your skills. They're about on the same level as Sonic's boss fights from the Generations side in the fun factor, which is to say that they're pretty damn enjoyable. And man, did they pick some good bosses for this game. BioLizard? Yeah, that makes sense for a Shadow Nostalgia Trip game. Good choice. Metal Overlord? That's not necessarily a Shadow boss, but it's still cool to see him in glorious HD. And is that Mephiles? Even as a proud 06 hater, I can't deny it's really cool to see him again, and oh my god, he's attacking me with the tilted towers. As for the open zone area in this game, it's also a lot of fun. Like Frontiers, it's a big open area with a lot of platforming challenges and secrets to find, but it definitely feels a lot neater compared to Frontiers. As much as I love Frontiers, the open zone maps undeniably feel like we kinda just took a random map and then just puked Sonic assets all over it. There's a stronger feeling of intentional design and connectivity here that I hope whatever Sonic game comes next takes inspiration from. Now, before we get talking about the story of this game, let's talk about some of the other bits. The visuals and music and stuff, you know. First of all, damn, this is a pretty looking game. It takes these environments from older titles and gives them a damn solid polish up. Generations was always one of the best looking Sonic games, but this is a serious treat to the eyes. And as for the music, it's a Sonic game. So that should tell you about everything you need to know. Okay, so to be serious about it for a second, I think all of the songs in this game are good, but there are some that are kind of an acquired taste. Like, there are some songs like Space Colony Arc Act 1 and the new version of What I'm Made Of that clicked instantly, but some like Chaos Island Act 1 and Rail Canyon Act 2 took a few listens before they truly clicked with me. I've noticed recent Sonic music has kinda taken a big drum and bass direction, and that's fine for me. I do enjoy a bit of good old D&B, and I do think the genre makes for good going fast music. But I do think most people, me included, would be disappointed if this franchise fully left its rock roots behind. Despite this though, the soundtrack is still an absolute back-to-back roster of absolute bangers and mash. But now, it's time we finally talk about the story. So yeah, this section's gonna be full of spoilers. If you want a quick spoiler-free summary of what I thought, Shadow Generations' story is a really solid Shadow story that, while could have explored some of its ideas a bit more thoroughly, is still a damn solid ride that I think does a better job of the whole moving on from the past shtick than Shadow 05 tried to. So with that in mind, we now jump into the spoiler territory. So if you haven't played the game yet, feel free to come back once you've done so. However, we are going to start off talking about Dark Beginnings, so if you've seen that, feel free to carry on for just a bit longer. Shadow Generations Dark Beginnings is a prequel animation released on the Sonic the Hedgehog YouTube channel that follows Shadow before the events of the game. The first episode depicts Shadow having nightmares about his time on the Ark, and it starts off as just a wholesome memory of Maria, but then things start going horribly wrong and it just gets weirder and creepier, with near psychological horror-esque imagery at times. In before someone quotes what I said in this part of the video and puts it next to the mitten scene from SpongeBob. Yeah, I'm onto you. He wakes up and he has a suspicion that that wasn't just any old nightmare, and something isn't right. So he decides he needs to get his hands on a spaceship and get to the Ark and investigate. Dark Beginnings is a really good 3-part short that gives us a lot of wholesome Shadow and Maria interactions, and a lot of Team Dark action. Like, seriously. The fight choreography here is insane. Seeing Shadow, Rouge and Omega team up to cause some carnage is a really fun ride. Shadow grabs and redirects the same missile twice! But I think what stuck with most people about this short was how it ended. As Shadow boards a rocket headed towards the Ark, we see him alone, thinking about what could have been if he could have saved Maria from her abrupt demise and got her cured. Seeing this tough guy act slowly break away from him until he snaps himself back into it, is accompanied with a beautiful vocal track performed by Casey Lee Williams, who I'm glad is still finding work after Rooster Teeth collapsed. She's a super talented singer. And man, this final scene It was heartbreaking, a grim reminder that Shadow's super cool tough guy act is hiding away a broken soul that has had everything he ever wanted taken away from him. The realization that while yes, he is upholding Maria's wish by saving the people of the world at all costs, ultimately, the one person he ever wanted to save, he failed to. It shows for definite that the powers that be that create this franchise do understand why people like Shadow so much. It's not just because he's an overpowered, edgy bad boy, but it's also because there's a layer of tragic humanity underneath. A character that has experienced loss in a horribly traumatic way. And all of this seamlessly leads us into the plot of the main game. So, if you haven't played the game yet, we're going full inhibitor rings off on all the spoilers here, so feel free to come back once you've played the game. So the story kicks off with Shadow investigating on the Ark, until he eventually encounters Black Doom, who has a diabolical plan to use the arrival of the Time Eater to try and manipulate Shadow once more. And so we take Shadow on a trip through Whitespace where he runs into his own little ensemble of characters, including characters that missed base generations such as Omega, Orbot and Cubot, and the GOAT. But the main notable characters we run into here are Gerald and Maria, brought from before the disaster that hit the Ark. And unlike the cast in Sonic Generations, who kinda just tell you where to find secrets, congratulate your NES ranks, and other such things, there's a lot of dialogue with these guys that just exists for flavor reasons, which makes it entertaining to go back and talk to them throughout the game for some more dialogue. He also runs into Rouge as well, despite her being in base gens, and I really enjoy how vulnerable Shadow and Rouge can be with each other in their dialogue. It really feels like the found family vibe of Team Dark has come back in a major way, and I think that's something that most fans will appreciate. I also think the cutscene presentation in this game has been a massive upgrade from Frontiers. That game has a lot of scenes where they're kinda just standing and talking, but here it feels a lot more thought has gone into how these characters emote and move around, and for that I applaud the work that Sonic Team has put into these cutscenes, and I hope we get more like it in the future. Gerald and Maria definitely get a lot of the best dialogue though, with Gerald bringing up some interesting lore implications, and Maria just having wholesome conversations with Shadow about some fun things, such as Shadow's caffeine addiction, or how much of a slacker he was when it came to education. It's a lot of really interesting and fun stuff that leads into the emotional core of this plot, which is Shadow considering the possibility that he might be able to stop the Ark disaster, or at least save Gerald and Maria from being victims of it, due to the fact that the timeline is disrupted. Admittedly, I don't think they lean into this as much as they could have. There's optional dialogue with Gerald where Shadow tries to warn him, but the professor cuts him off and tells him not to tell him, because it might damage the timeline, and I feel like an interaction like this should have been in the main plot instead of being optional. And another thing I think the plot could have done with is more of Maria. Specifically, I think it would have been cool for the other characters to meet her. I like the idea of Sonic getting to meet her, but admittedly there isn't really anywhere in the plot I think it would fit, so that's fair it didn't happen. But like, come on, at least let the rest of Team Dark meet her so they can get a better idea of what their comrade has been fighting for all this time. But overworld characters aren't the only place to go for some fun fanservice interactions, because the boss fights are pretty heavy in dialogue as well. His trash-talking back and forth with Metal Overlord is a lot of fun, and oh my god, Mephiles. What they did with Mephiles was so clever, having it be the actual Mephiles from 06, who's using the fact that the timeline is scattered as his chance to try and claw his way back into canon. That's such a cool idea. And also, he's voiced by Goro Akechi, so, you know, that's pretty fun.
How can such a worthless piece of trash be more special than me?
And Shadow's parting line to him: "There is no future for you. Ever." Cold as fuck. I love it. Another thing in the story I really like is how Shadow finds the fake emerald from Sonic Adventure 2, and that's actually the one he gives Sonic after his boss fight in Sonic's story, only to have Rouge switch them out later when the time is right. That's both such a really cool callback and really clever writing to explain how Shadow can still use Chaos Control after giving Sonic his emerald. I say give. Sonic beats his ass and takes it from him, because unfortunately for Shadow, Sonic is just him. But still, kudos to you, Flynn. That was very clever. And then in the later half of the story, a lot of cool stuff starts going on. First of all, I really like Black Doom's plan. It's really clever. Awakening all these latent powers in Shadow to have him start Doom-maxing, making Shadow less immune to Black Arm's propaganda so that he can take him over and make him the latest addition to his army. That's really cool. And all of this leads into a really cool finale where Shadow learns that he must not strike back in anger. Just look at Shadow's genuinely happy smile here, by the way, I love it so much. All of this leads into a genuinely badass final boss that makes the Time Eater look even stupider than it already is. Oh, that looks like a homing shot, you say? Well, this looks like peak fiction, numbnuts!
Shadow Hedgehog. This is the destiny I choose. Now, to end this!
But of course, when all is said and done, Shadow completing his mission and correcting his part of the white space means that Gerald and Maria start to fade away and he has to say goodbye to them one last time. And while he tries to think of a way to save them last minute, he ultimately must accept that he can't change their fate. He skates away with tears in his eyes, and so concludes the story of Shadow Generations. And what a tragically beautiful way to send it off. So, I've seen complaints about this story that it's character regression, as supposedly Shadow stopped letting his past control him back in Shadow the Hedgehog 2005, and that Shadow Generations blatantly ignores that, and to be honest, I have two major points against this. First of all, I think it's very close-minded to believe that character regression automatically equals bad writing. I think when done well, a story where a character's circumstances cause old wounds to reopen can be a very interesting story to tell. For example, what Frontiers does with Tales. It takes the sloppy writing of Forces and turns it into a story of trying to figure everything out all over again. And I think that's a big part of why I like Tales' story in Frontiers so much. My second point though is just, that's not how mental trauma works. When something horrible happens to you in life, that can often change you in a big way. And true, while one day you may finally decide to stop letting your regrets and sorrows control you, you never really stop feeling bad about it. You never stop wondering if things were different. That's just a part of life, and that's what Shadow is going through. The day may never come where he'll finally stop lamenting what happened on the Ark, but despite all of that, he gets back up. He keeps fighting on. And that is what makes Shadow, as Sega has so eloquently put it this year, fearless. At the start of the story, when Shadow first thinks he might have seen Maria in the white space, he decides it's more important to focus on the task at hand than chase the past. They clearly haven't forgotten what Shadow learned in Shadow 05, it's just that when he does see that Maria is actually back, he is tempted to see if it's possible to save her, and to be honest, who wouldn't in his shoes? So no, I don't think they've forgotten Shadow 05. And no, I don't think this is character regression, at least not in a way that's harmful to the narrative. So yeah, while the story of Shadow Generations does have its problems, it's still one of the best Sonic stories going right now, up there with the likes of Adventure 2 and Black Knight for me. I don't exactly ask for Shakespeare out of my Sonic stories, I just want an interesting premise and for the characters to do the things I love them for, and Shadow Generations does pass that check for me. So, in conclusion, Shadow Generations is a masterfully put together Sonic game that comes packaged with what was already considered to be one of the series' best. And the hype for this franchise seems to be through the roof now. If Sonic Team can keep this momentum up, ha ha ha, we may truly be living in the best timeline for this franchise. This package truly has everything for every kind of Sonic fan, and frankly, you'd be insane not to pick it up at some point. Oh yeah, and that upcoming movie-free DLC looks pretty sick as well. I have a Blue Sky now. I'll probably regret this in the future, but for now, links in the description.